conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons who do not agree on who gets to heaven or how, they can agree on the relationship they want with the government, and that's they want to be left alone. They do not ask the government to go make everybody be an Episcopalian. They simply wish to be left alone. So around our table, the center-right, the Reagan Republican movement, are a bunch of people who don't agree on everything. There's no 20-point manifesto that everybody agrees on. And when you think about the various people that vote for you, some of them wouldn't have dinner with each other. It's not necessary that they agree on 10 points or 20 points. You stand in the center of the circle and reach out as a candidate or an elected official and reach out and say, I'm going to leave your guns alone, your kids alone, your faith alone, your business alone, your money alone, connecting with each of the voters. So our coalition is actually a low-maintenance coalition because nobody in our coalition wants anything from anybody else in the coalition on a vote-moving issue. They don't want anything at the expense of somebody else. Now, we end up with arguments on secondary and tertiary issues, and sometimes we end up with arguments that can be avoided. Back in the 1980s, there was the big push for prayer in school. Well, of course, the challenge with prayer in school is that if we use your prayer, we don't use my prayer, and all of a sudden there was conflict. But when that shifted to parental choice in education, the conflict disappeared and gives parents the same control over their children's education, but not in conflict with anybody else. So we actually have a meeting in a room about this size in Washington, D.C. once a week, put 130, 140 people in the room, the broad center-right coalition, think tanks, advocacy groups, gun groups, various communities of faith, people from the White House, the House and the Senate. And again, not everybody agrees on everything. We'll have 30 presentations in an hour and a half. It's much like Henry Kriegel's meeting here in Montana, where he brings together center-right activists and leaders on a monthly basis. In Washington, we don't have a lot to do, so we meet weekly. And again, our coalition works well together because as long as the Christians agree not to raise anybody else's taxes, and as long as the gun owners agree not to throw prophylactics at the Christians' kids, and as long as the landowners can agree not to violate other people's rights, nobody steps on anybody else in the coalition. And we can all work together and go out to crush the left. Now, our friends on the left, I actually got a call 3 years ago from a New York reporter. Hillary Clinton had just given a speech up in New York, and she said that what the lefts needed, what the progressives needed, was a meeting similar to the one Grover runs for progressives. And the question from the reporter, what do you think of that? And I explained how our coalition works together and why people show up and vote as conservatives or Republicans. They have many, many different reasons, but they all end up with the same candidate when we put our candidate dead center of the coalition. We just had a presidential candidate who was a little off center of the coalition in the last election. It caused some challenges, but Reagan in 80, Reagan in 84, Bush in 88, if not 92, and Bush in 2000, if not 2004, stood directly in the center of the Leave Us Alone coalition and won their elections well. So here's how Hillary's coalition works. Who would sit around Hillary's table, recently stolen by Obama? Trial lawyers, labor unions, the big city political machines, the two wings of the dependency movement, those people who are locked into welfare dependency, the people who make $90,000 a year, managing the dependency of other people, making sure none of them get jobs and become Republicans. Then you have all the various coercive utopians, the radical environmentalists, the people who've made the cars too small to put your entire family into, the toilets too small to flush completely. And they have a whole series of rules. On the Sabbath, you have to separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass for the recycling priests. And they've got lots of rules that are slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. And And their list of shall nots and musts, they intend to enforce through the state. So around Hillary Obama's table, trial lawyers, labor unions, big city political machines, radical environmentalists, two wings of the dependency movement, they can get along and work together as long as we are stupid enough to keep throwing money into the center of the table. Because then they can get along in the sense that people get along in the movie after the bank robbery. One for you, one for you, one for you. They all appear to be happy. But if we do our job right, if we say no new taxes and mean it and hold that for any period of time at all, the left sees the center of their table, the money in the center of their table, beginning to decline. And then there is conflict. Then they begin to look at each other a little bit more like the second to the last scene in those lifeboat movies. They begin to wonder who they're going to eat or who they're going to throw overboard. The left is not made up of friends and allies. The left is made up of competing parasites. And if we do not let them gnaw on taxpayers, they will cheerfully gnaw on the guy sitting next to them. Our job to advance liberty is to stop throwing money in the front and allow the conflicts within the left to come to the fore so that when they gnaw on the guy next to them, we stop giving them additional money so that 2 years from now and 4 years from now, when we face them in elections, there are fewer of them and they're shorter. So those are the two competing coalitions in American politics. And if you think of why people are on one side or another, their vote-moving issue is either because they're in the takings coalition and they want the government to take things from some people and give them to them, usually money, or in the Leave Us Alone coalition because on their vote-moving issue, not on every issue. I assure you, as a member of the National Rifle Association's Board of Directors, many of our members have what I consider the oddest views on free trade with China. But they don't vote on the question of free trade with China. They vote on having the government leave their Second Amendment rights alone. So there is much conflict on secondary and tertiary issues, but on vote-moving issues, we can work together. Now, Americans for Tax Reform shares the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. Henry Kriegel shares it with everybody in Montana. And we've done fairly well, certainly at the national level, in drawing a line in the sand and saying no tax increases. Since 1993, there has not been a tax increase passed in Washington, D.C. The one that Clinton got passed with the Democratic House and Senate. That's 15 years in Washington, D.C. without a tax increase. That is the longest period in American history without a tax increase out of Washington, D.C., going back to George Washington and the whole Tea Party thing. So we have been living for much of our lives in an ahistoric period where we've not let the other team raise taxes. And that has been helpful in making the case that the Republicans are the party that will not raise your taxes. And in those states where they've drawn that line in the sand, the Republican Party has done better. In those states, Colorado, Virginia, where raising taxes became optional for the Republicans, traditionally red states have turned more blue. And not just because people get disappointed if the guys they elect vote for tax increases, but every time you raise taxes and put more money into the state's hand, you hire more Democratic precinct workers. So the next time there's an election, you shouldn't be surprised that the other team is bigger and tougher, because you funded them. You made it possible with tax increases. Now, at the national level, we have branded the Republican Party as the party that will not raise your taxes. They may do other silly things, they may disappoint you in other ways, but they will not raise your taxes. And that's what's kept the Republican Party at the strength level that it's been at. The brand itself is key. Coca-Cola spends a lot of time branding Coca-Cola and maintaining quality control so that you know when you walk into a store what's in the Coke bottle. You pick up the Coke bottle, you throw it in the basket, you take it home. You know what's there. You don't have to ask your friends what do you think's inside. You don't have to taste it. You don't have to read the label. You know what's in there. You